Let's dive right into this explainer. As a historian, I've always been completely fascinated by how physical geography essentially dictates human destiny. Today, we're cracking open the historical archives to uncover how a really unique geological anomaly just rapidly birthed Birmingham, Alabama. We're going to look way beyond that towering skyline to understand the incredible industrial progress of this area, but also, crucially, the brutal human cost that made the whole shebang possible.
This striking historical quote perfectly sets our stage. A local at the time said, "God Almighty created this earth, but a Yankee geologist showed us where the money was." And honestly, they hit the nail right on the head. Before 1870, this area, it was just red dirt, just a quiet little railroad crossing called Illington Village with a few hundred people. No smokestacks, really no reason to stop. But a massive geological discovery changed everything, literally overnight. It wasn't actually magic that built this city out of the wilderness, even if it felt like it to the folks living through it. It was a pretty ruthless combination of geography, capitalism, and raw human labor.
So what was this discovery? Well, nature essentially cheated in the Jones Valley. It grouped the three absolutely vital ingredients for iron making right there within a 20-mile radius. We call this the geological triple threat. You've got Red Mountain iron ore, specifically hematite for the metal, the Warrior coal field for the massive amounts of coking-grade coal you need to burn at over 2,500 degrees, and a limestone valley, which acts as a flux to pull out impurities. To put that into perspective, in the entire world, there were only two other places, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Germany's Ruhr Valley, that had these three things sitting so incredibly close together.
Looking at this map from around 1950, you can clearly trace that unbelievable proximity. The ore mines, the coal fields, the limestone quarries, they're practically right on top of each other. This meant industrialists could extract the raw materials and just toss them directly into blast furnaces. They didn't have to ship them across a whole continent. It was an unprecedented geographical advantage that basically guaranteed massive, massive profits.
And because of that exact geography, the whole area just exploded. 38,000. From that quiet, dusty crossing in 1870, the population skyrocketed to 38,000 people in just 30 years. By 1900, the city had over 60 of these giant industrial chimneys dominating the sky. And get this, it was producing 1/3 of all the pig iron in the entire American South. Journalists at the time were so blown away by the sheer speed of this growth that they called it a magic trick. And well, that's exactly what cemented Birmingham's famous nickname, the Magic City.
All right, moving on to part 1, the rise of the Magic City and the heaviest corner.
Now, industrialists like Henry de Bartolevin, they realized early on that the real fortune wasn't just in selling pig iron. Actually, scratch that. It was in selling the very ground the city was being built on. By 1887, de Bartolevin's company owned a staggering 150,000 acres of mining land. Just look at this timeline and how this boom transformed the landscape. In 1870, land was selling for $5 an acre. By 1880, they lit the first blast furnace. And by 1890, that exact same piece of land was going for $50,000 an acre. That is a wild jump. Speculators all the way from New York and London were buying up entire city blocks sight unseen.
So, bounded by mountains to the south and coal mines to the west, the city couldn't easily sprawl outwards. It had to grow straight up. Notice the sheer scale of these 4 massive steel-framed skyscrapers: the Woodward, Brown Marks, Empire, and American Trust, all built between 1903 and 1912. This specific intersection became known as the heaviest corner on Earth. And it wasn't just because of the literal physical tonnage of the buildings, but because of the immense financial weight concentrated per square foot. We're talking about an entire skyline built purely on the wealth generated by pig iron.
Okay, let's turn to part 2, the human foundation, the brutal cost. We really need to drop the curtain on this wealthy urban facade, because doing so exposes a deeply tragic reality. You know, the men sitting in those towering new skyscrapers? They absolutely were not the ones down in the mines or sweating at the blast furnaces. The guys who actually shoveled the coke and mined the ore fell into 3 heavily exploited groups, working in grueling 1,500-degree heat. You had European immigrants arriving by the trainload, willing to work for just $1.50 a day. You had displaced poor white farmers who had fled tanking cotton prices. And, most severely exploited of all, you had formerly enslaved black men trapped in the horrific convict lease system.
The absolute most tragic among these were the convict laborers forced into virtual slavery. To keep industrial costs literally rock bottom, companies leased prisoners directly from the state. For example, in 1888, the Pratt mines used over 300 convict laborers. These were mostly African-American men who had been arrested on incredibly minor, trumped-up charges like vagrancy.
They were housed in these dark, windowless wooden barracks and forced to dig coal for 12 hours a day. They suffered horrific mortality rates, all just to maximize corporate profit. It's a really dark chapter.
And you can physically see the stark disparity in these segregated company towns. Even for the non-convict workers, housing was completely controlled by the industrialists. On one side, you've got structurally sound homes provided for white workers. But contrast that sharply with the community right next to it, where black workers were deliberately crammed into spaces built with unseasoned pine and really substandard tarp paper roofs.
Look at this quote from a 1920s report. It notes that the quarters for African-American laborers immediately adjoined the waste heap of the furnace, and the smoke blew directly over them. They faced this terrible irony. They were meeting these extraordinary production demands, yet they had to endure highly polluted second-class living conditions. Their housing was intentionally positioned so the prevailing winds blew thick, choking smoke directly over their homes. It was this inescapable environment of smog and noise. It really proves that the very foundation of the city's wealth was built on systemic inequality and deliberate environmental hazards.
Which brings us to our final section, Part 3, Modernizing the Forge, the Legacy. By the 1960s and 70s, the old industrial economy that built Birmingham was really starting to falter. Cheaper foreign steel and major social shifts forced the city to basically restructure its entire economy and fundamentally change how it produced metal. The technological leap you see here is just staggering. Contrast the aging, smog-choked, coal-fired blast furnaces of the early boom, like the historic Woodward Iron Company, with a modern electric arc furnace from 2020 at U.S. Steel. Instead of relying purely on newly mined coal and ore, this sustainable modern process melts down recycled scrap steel. The old skyline, the one with 60 smoke-billowing chimneys, has finally given way to advanced, cleaner metallurgy.
So what legacy does the Magic City actually leave behind? As we reflect on those massive skyscrapers of the heaviest corner that are still standing today, and the immense human toll exacted to build them, we're left with a profound question. What is the true legacy of a city forged by such a ruthless combination of geological luck and intense human exploitation? It's a piece of history that really challenges us to look a whole lot closer at the foundations beneath our own modern progress.